The night the storm came down from the mountains, a man nearly lost his life and found the woman who would change it forever. Snow swallowed the highway in seconds. His SUV spun once, twice, then vanished into the white. And when he thought no one could possibly find him out there, a pair of headlights cut through the blizzard, and a stranger's gloved hand knocked on his window. She was a small-town doctor. He was a man used to saving companies, not himself. But that night, under the roar of the wind and the hum of her truck's heater, two people who should never have met began a story neither of them saw coming, one that would lead through storms, heartbreak, and the quiet miracle of two tiny heartbeats. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. Snow hammered the windshield so hard it looked alive. Ethan Whitaker squinted through the blur of white, the wipers thumping like a desperate heartbeat. Highway 2 had vanished beneath the storm, just a pale ribbon swallowed by wind. He slowed to 20, then 10, the tires humming over ice. 10 more miles to the lodge, he told himself. Just 10. The voice in his earpiece cracked again. Mr. Whitaker, we need the revised numbers before static. Then nothing. The signal died, replaced by the howl of Montana winter. Ethan tossed the earpiece aside and leaned forward. The dashboard clock blinked 9:47 temperature 10 degrees. He hadn't seen another car for half an hour. The storm had come early, faster than the forecast promised, and now every pine on the ridge bent like it might snap. He turned the wheel slightly left, felt the rear tires slide. The SUV fishtailed once, twice, then spun. Headlights flared across a curtain of snow before everything jolted sideways. The world went weightless, then slammed back down. The airbag exploded in a blinding puff, knocking the breath from his chest. Silence followed, thick and unreal. Ethan coughed into the powder smell, pain stinging up his wrist. He touched the bruise, hissed. His phone screen glowed faintly. No bars. Outside, wind howled through the trees, a sound older than language. He tried the door. It opened an inch, then stuck. He shoved harder until the drift gave way. Icy air knifing his face. Snowflakes swirled like ash. Somewhere in that white chaos, an engine rumbled closer. 2 yellow headlights cut through the dark, growing brighter until they filled the night. A pickup crawled to a stop beside his tilted SUV. A figure climbed down, small, bundled, a beam of light sweeping across the wreck. The person banged on his window. "You alive in there?" a woman shouted. He blinked at her through the cracks of melting frost. The light caught her eyes gray, steady. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice wavered. She pulled open the door, snow pouring in. "You don't look fine." "Any head-strike nausea?" I said. "I'm fine." She ignored the protest, slipping a gloved hand under his chin, angling a small penlight. "Pupils equal. That's good." Her tone was brisk. "No nonsense. I'm Dr. Claire Bennett, Glacier Bend Clinic. We need to get you out before the road closes completely. Clinic, I just need a tow." "There's no tow until morning." She straightened. "Can you walk? I drove here from Seattle. I can handle walking." He stepped out, the snow up to his shins. The wind bit his face like needles. Claire moved around to his passenger side, grabbing a duffel and shutting the door with her hip. "You've got a mild sprain on that wrist." "Keep it still." Ethan wanted to argue, but the cold stole his words. He followed her to the pickup, boots crunching. Inside, heat blasted from the vents. Steam rose from their coats. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked. "Glacier Bend, 7 miles south." "That's it. I passed nothing but trees. Trees and 400 souls," she said. "You're lucky I was coming back from a ranch call." She shifted into gear, chains rattling on the tires. The road vanished again behind sheets of snow. For a while, neither spoke. Only the hum of the heater and the roar outside filled the space. Ethan glanced at her hands on the wheel, small but strong, nails cut short, knuckles faintly reddened from the cold. "You always drive in this kind of weather, only when people do dumb things," she said, flicking him a look, like thinking their car can outsmart Montana. Despite the ache in his wrist, he smiled. Point taken. A ridge of wind blew snow sideways, rocking the truck. She steadied the wheel with both hands. Visibility's under 50 feet. If we lose the markers, we stop. Understood. He nodded. The storm howled louder, and for a moment the truck felt suspended in blankness. No up, no down, only white. Then the radio crackled to life. Claire, generators down again. A male voice said, "We're switching to candles. The oxygen tanks won't last till morning." Static followed. Claire gripped the mic. "Copy that. I'm 10 minutes out with a patient. Keep the emergency lights on if you can." The response dissolved in static. She hung the receiver and muttered, "Of course it dies tonight." "Something wrong?" Ethan asked. "Our backup power's older than both of us. Keeps the ventilators running, but not for long. We'll manage. You sure you shouldn't turn back?" She gave a short laugh. To what a snowbank with your name on it. He studied her profile, the streak of light from the dash sliding across her cheek. Calm under pressure, the kind of calm money couldn't buy. He'd seen executives crumble under smaller stakes. "Look," he began, "if the clinic needs a generator, I can save it," she said softly. "Let's get you breathing first." They drove on. The snow eased for a heartbeat, revealing the faint glow of a town, half a dozen lights scattered along the valley floor. Then darkness again. 7 miles, she said. Feels longer in storms. He leaned back, letting the hum of the engine steady him. Pain throbbed in his wrist, dull and deep. He caught himself watching the side of her face, the way she chewed the inside of her cheek when the truck slid. "What made you choose a place like this?" he asked. "People here remember your name." "That's reason enough." Her voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the storm. A shape loomed ahead, an old wooden sign, Glacier Bend Community Clinic. "Tu Betsomif." Relief rippled through him. "Nearly there," she murmured. The radio sputtered again. Only fragments oxygen. Backup failing. Babies. Claire's eyes flashed. She pressed harder on the gas. "Hold on." They reached the clinic, a low building huddled against the snowdrifts. Inside, candles flickered through the windows, little dots of gold in the dark. Claire swung the truck beside the entrance and jumped out. Ethan followed, the wind slapping his face. She opened the passenger door, grabbing a first aid bag. "Stay here till I signal," she said, already running inside. Her figure vanished in the swirl of white. He stood for a moment beside the truck, breath steaming, the night pressing close. The world had narrowed to the crunch of snow beneath his boots and the glow of a single lantern through frosted glass. His smartwatch buzzed 8 missed calls from New York. Investors. Deadlines. All the noise of his other life. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then he tapped it dark. The only light he wanted was the one flickering in that small building ahead. The pickup shuddered as wind clawed at its doors. Inside, the heater roared, throwing waves of dry warmth across the cab. Claire reached into the glove box, tore open a roll of medical tape, and gestured for Ethan's hand. "Let me see that wrist again," she said. "It's fine," he muttered, but he offered it anyway. His fingers were stiff, skin reddened from the cold. Claire unwrapped a short length of tape, her movements steady, efficient. The scent of antiseptic clung faintly to her jacket. She braced his forearm against her knee and wound the tape with care, tight enough for support, loose enough for comfort. "Try to keep it above your heart for a bit. You bruised it when the airbag hit," she said. Ethan watched her hands. Small scars crossed the back's tiny white lines, almost invisible unless the light caught them just right. Not random nicks, but the kind that came from sutures, from years of stitching others back together. "Those marks," he said before he could stop himself. "Looks like you've been patched up a few times yourself." She glanced at her own hands and smiled, a cornered little smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hazard of the job. Needles don't always like to cooperate. "Or patience," he offered. She laughed softly. "You'd be surprised. Out here, people still thank you, sometimes with pies." He leaned back, flexing his bandaged wrist. "You get paid in pies." "Some weeks." "Yes." The wind hammered harder, rattling the mirrors. They both looked out of the windshield, at the empty road unspooling through walls of white. "So, she said after a while. Ethan Whitaker. You're not from around here. Seattle. Big city, she said. What brings you to Glacier Bend? We don't get many men driving luxury SUVs through a blizzard. He hesitated. The Truth Business Retreat, solitude, a mind that couldn't turn off, felt hollow, spoken aloud. Needed a break, he said instead, from what he gave a half smile. Everything. She studied him for a moment, then looked back at the road. You should try fishing. Works better than crashing into snowbanks. I'll keep that in mind. Silence filled the cab again. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like two people breathing the same air, each guarding the space between them. The dashboard cast their faces in amber. The storm outside blurred the world into nothing but sound. Ethan watched her profile, the calm set of her mouth, the single strand of hair that had escaped her knit cap. There was something centered about her, something unhurried, as if she had learned to move at the pace of the land around her. You said Glacier Bend Clinic, he began. How long have you been there? 5 years. Before that, she adjusted the wipers before answering. Seattle. He turned toward her. Really Harbor View. Cardiac Fellowship. Her tone was neutral, but he heard the edge of old memory underneath. Didn't finish it. Ethan's brow lifted. That's a big change. City to here. Yeah. She didn't elaborate. I had a company based near Harbor View once, he said, trying to place it. A medtech startup. Heart mapping software. Her eyes flicked toward him. You were the Whitaker investor. He gave a small nod. That was a lifetime ago. I remember the pilot project, she said quietly. It helped us visualize cardiac output in real time. We thought it'd change everything. Did it? She shrugged. It helped for a while. Then the funding dried up, and I left. He waited, but she didn't add more. Instead, she leaned forward, peering through the windshield. Roads getting slick again. He looked out. Snow was piling faster now, the drifts curling like frozen waves. So you left all that behind, he said softly. Seattle. Research. The kind of medicine people fight to get into. Her hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't leave medicine. I left noise. The words hung between them, warm against the cold. They rounded a bend. Headlights sweeping over pine trunks glazed in white. A sudden patch of black ice gleamed across the road like spilled ink. Claire's voice snapped sharp. Hold on. The truck fishtailed hard. The rear swung left, then right. Ethan grabbed the door handle, heart pounding. Snow roared under the tires. For a second, the world tilted. Then Claire corrected steady hands. Even pressure. One controlled breath. The truck straightened. They both exhaled. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. You've done that before. Too many times, she said, her knuckles whitening. You okay? He nodded, forcing a smile. That was impressive. She reached for the heater knob, turning it down a notch. Black ice hides under beauty, same as people. He looked at her, caught off guard by the truth in her tone. You always talk like that, only when someone almost makes me crash my truck, she said. But there was laughter under it now. For a few miles, neither spoke again. The truck's engine droned steady, a heartbeat against the storm. Ethan realized the silence between them had changed. It wasn't wary anymore. It was shared, the kind that lets two people exist side by side without explanation. He thought of the deals waiting in his inbox, of the calls piling up on his phone. They felt far away now, like static from another planet. Out here, time had narrowed to the hiss of tires and the rhythmic sway of windshield wipers. Claire glanced over. You're quiet? I'm listening. To what? The silence. She smiled faintly. Careful. That's how Montana gets you. He let out a low laugh, almost surprised by the sound. Maybe I need getting... The truck crested a small hill. Beyond it, faint through the curtain of snow, glimmered the first hint of town, warm lights trembling on the horizon. There it is, Claire said, relief soft in her voice. Clinics just ahead. As they descended, the wind dropped for the first time all night. For one heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. Snow fell gently instead of sideways. The road leveled out. Then, just as suddenly, The distant lights flickered. Once, twice, and went dark. Claire's hands tightened around the steering wheel. The glow from the dashboard lit her face in dim orange. "Generator's gone," she whispered. Ethan stared through the windshield at the valley swallowed by night. The storm began again, harder this time, wind curling around the cab like a warning. Neither spoke. The heater hummed on, but the warmth felt fragile now, like a candle fighting to stay alive in a house full of ghosts. When they pulled up, the clinic looked more like a farmhouse than a hospital. Snow stacked on the roof in heavy ridges. Every window was dark except for a few flickers of candlelight. Claire killed the engine and stepped out before Ethan could speak. "Stay close," she called over her shoulder. The porch steps ice over fast. He followed, crunching through the drift. Inside, the air was warmer, scented faintly of disinfectant and kerosene. Shadows of people moved across the hallway walls, nurses holding flashlights, a volunteer handing out blankets. "Dr. Bennett," a young nurse said, relief flooding her voice. "The generator's out again. We've got 3 new patients, 2 from the ranch fire and 1 with an asthma flare." "Okay," Claire said, pulling off her coat. "Candace, you're on vitals. Mark, keep the oxygen rotation going manually. Use the tanks from storage if the concentrators fail. I'll take the new admissions." It wasn't panic she projected. It was direction. Calm threaded through every word like steel hidden beneath silk. Ethan stood just inside the doorway, water dripping from his jacket, watching her shift from rescuer to commander in seconds. The nurse handed her a clipboard. Room 2 rancher, fever 101.9. Room 4, teen male, asthma exacerbation. Room 5, laceration. Waitress from the diner. Claire nodded once. "Let's move." He trailed behind her, unsure if he should help or stay out of the way. The hall smelled of bleach and sweat and wet wool. Lanterns perched on counters cast their gold halos over the worn linoleum floors. In room 2, the rancher lay bundled in flannel, cheeks flushed, breathing ragged. Claire touched his forehead, checked his pulse with the old wristwatch she still wore upside down. "When did the fever start yesterday?" The man croaked. "Any chest pain, just tired." "Hydrate him," she said to the nurse, "and start IV fluids when the generator's back. For now, oral rehydration, Tylenol every 6 hours." She scribbled a note and was gone again, her pace brisk but never rushed. Room 4. A teenager sat propped against pillows, wheezing through an oxygen mask. The faint hiss of air from the portable tank filled the room. His mother stood nearby, eyes wide with worry. "Hey, Logan," Claire said, crouching beside him. "Still can't get enough air." "Huh." He shook his head weakly. "Your oxygen's good," she assured. "We'll give another albuterol nib. Mom, hold his hand for me." Ethan stood in the doorway, hands stuffed in his pockets. He had seen surgeons in glass towers and CEOs in boardrooms, but none of them had this focus that seemed both fierce and tender. In the next room, a waitress in a diner uniform pressed a blood-soaked towel to her palm. "I dropped a knife," she said with a nervous laugh. "Good thing it wasn't your sense of humor," Claire replied, snapping on gloves. She cleaned the wound, needle flashing under lantern light, and began to stitch. Ethan found himself transfixed by the simplicity of her motion loop, pulled tie like mending fabric instead of flesh. "Hand's gonna heal fine," Claire told the woman, voice gentle but firm. "No dishwashing for a week. Tell your boss I said so." When the last knot was tied, she stepped back, stretching her shoulders. Only then did she notice Ethan lingering by the door. "You don't sit still well, do you?" He smiled faintly. "Not usually." "Then make yourself useful. There's coffee in the lounge, strong enough to wake the dead." "I'd rather help," he said. "What do you need?" She paused, considering him. "Fine. There's a box of blankets by the front desk. Hand them out. Keep people warm." He nodded and slipped away, grateful for something to do. The minutes bled into hours. The storm battered the windows like a living thing. He moved from room to room, following Claire's quiet orbit as she tended patients, checked vitals, replaced batteries and flashlights. At one point, she stopped beside him, brushing stray hair from her forehead. We keep 8 beds, she said, almost to herself. Sometimes it's enough. And when it's not, then we improvise. He looked around the cracked tiles, the humming lanterns, the portable oxygen tanks. You're running this whole place on fumes. It's Montana, she said simply. We make do. He pulled out his phone, though he knew there was no service. When this is over, I'll send someone. You need a proper generator, newer monitors, Ethan. Her voice was soft but final. Let's get through midnight first. The way she said it silenced him. Not ungrateful, just practical. Grounded. He tucked the phone away. By 2 the storm had eased, though the world outside remained buried. Inside, candles burned low. Claire crouched near the breaker panel in the hallway, screwdriver in hand. Old thing overheats, she muttered. Trips itself when the wind hits just right. Can I do anything? Ethan asked. Hold the flashlight steady. He crouched beside her, the beam trembling slightly from his hand. Her hair had come loose from its clip, curling damply against her neck. She worked in silence, twisting wires, resetting switches with surgical precision. There, she said, flipping the main breaker. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the old generator coughed like an old smoker clearing his throat. A low hum built beneath their feet. One by one, lights flickered on down the hall, growing brighter until the building glowed. The staff cheered softly, relief mixing with exhaustion. Claire exhaled and leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. Ethan stared, momentarily speechless. The light painted her face in gold, revealing the faint lines of fatigue, the smudge of soot on her cheek, the steadiness in her expression that didn't fade even now. Not bad, he said quietly. Give it an hour, she replied. It'll die again. But her smile lingered a second longer this time. They walked together down the corridor. Patience slept. The teenager's breathing had steadied, rhythmic and calm. The rancher snored softly. Even the snow seemed to hush its fury outside. Ethan stopped near the window, looking out at the white-covered street. You ever wonder why you stay? Claire followed his gaze. Because someone has to. He nodded, then pressed a hand against his chest. You okay? She asked. Yeah, he said, though he wasn't sure. It wasn't pain, just a strange flutter, a quickened beat that had nothing to do with fear. He caught her watching him, concern in her eyes. Sit down, she said automatically. I'm fine. You sure? He forced a small smile. Maybe it's just the coffee. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. The generator hummed steady, casting soft light across the waiting room where the two of them stood, the tech millionaire with no signal, the small-town doctor with more lives on her hands than hours of sleep. The wind pressed against the windows again, testing their strength. Ethan found himself hoping the power would hold, not for the light, but because he didn't want to see the night end. The clinic had settled into a rare quiet. Outside, the storm rebuilt itself, flinging fresh snow against the windows like handfuls of salt. Inside, the lights hummed low from the generator's half-hearted pulse. Claire moved through the dim hallway checking vitals, her shoes whispering over the linoleum. Ethan sat in the waiting area, jacket folded over one arm, eyes tracing the patterns of frost crawling up the glass. The flutter in his chest had faded after coffee, or so he told himself, though now it returned in brief, uncertain waves. She appeared beside him with a portable monitor balanced in one hand. You're pale again, she said. Still insisting you're fine? He smiled faintly. Corporate training. We're taught to minimize risk. Lucky for you, I don't work for your board. She wheeled the monitor closer, clipping 2 sensors to his wrist and chest. The paper feed rustled as the machine began its slow scribble of lines and spikes. For a while, the only sound was the storm pressing against the walls. Claire watched the rhythm form. You see this segment, she asked, pointing. Short burst here, then back to normal. That's called paroxysmal atrial tachycardia. He blinked. Sounds expensive. Just means your heart likes to sprint without permission. I prefer to call that ambition. Her eyes flicked toward him, unimpressed, but amused. Ambition usually starts higher than the left atrium. He laughed softly, the sound ending on a breath that wasn't quite steady. She adjusted the cuff on his arm, the Velcro hissing against his sleeve. The screen climbed to 138 BPM, then slowed, triggered by stress, dehydration, overwork, she said. Ring any bells? Ethan leaned back. You could say that. Care to elaborate? He hesitated. The truth felt too exposed in this small, lantern-lit room. I fly about 200,000 miles a year. 12 countries last quarter. 5 mergers. 3 acquisitions. Sounds exhausting. It pays well. She looked up from the monitor. That's not what I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves, filling the silence he couldn't. Claire tore the paper strip from the machine and studied the peaks. You're stable now, but you need rest. Fluids. Probably a full cardiac workup when you get back to Seattle. I'm not due back for another week, he said. Then maybe the universe finally found a way to slow you down. He smirked. By throwing me into a snowbank. Whatever works. She stood, turning toward the supply cabinet. When she came back, she held a glass of water and a small tablet. Beta blocker. Mild dose. It'll help your heart remember its manners. He took the pill, the cool water easing the dryness in his throat. You always this commanding only when people think they're invincible. He studied her as she cleared the monitor. There was a steadiness in the way she moved, like she'd practiced calm until it became muscle memory. Yet he caught a flicker of weariness beneath it, the shadow of someone who'd seen too many heart monitors flatline. Can I ask you something, he said. She glanced over her shoulder. Go ahead. When do you rest? Her hands paused over the wires. I don't think about it. Maybe you should. She smiled without humor. If I stop thinking about everyone else, who will he wanted to answer? But the monitor chirped again. The rhythm on screen spiked. Erratic. She moved closer, fingers finding his pulse. Ethan, I'm fine, he said quickly, though his skin had gone pale. Don't argue, she murmured. Breathe for me. In. Out. He followed her rhythm, eyes locked on hers. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single exchange of air and gaze, the storm outside fading to a distant hum. The heart rate slowed, 140, 120, 90, until it settled back near 72. Claire exhaled, letting his wrist go. You scared me there. Guess I'm good at that. Don't make a habit of it. He tried to joke, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. That wasn't just stress. Was it? Probably started that way. You push too hard for too long. Something gives. Tonight it was your heart. Tomorrow. Who knows? He leaned forward, elbows on knees. You sound like my CFO. Then listen this time. She scribbled notes on the chart, the tip of her pen scratching softly. No caffeine, no alcohol. Rest. He glanced at the snow-buried world outside. Rest where roads are closed. Remember, her pen stopped. You'll stay here until morning. We've got a cot in exam room 1. I can't take your space. You can, and you will. I'll write you a doctor's order if it helps. He met her eyes, saw the faintest trace of warmth behind her professional mask. Do you always win your arguments this easily? Only when I'm right. She left him with the cot and a folded blanket, promising to check again in an hour. The clinic had grown still, machines idling low, the generator purring like an old cat. Ethan lay back, staring at the ceiling tiles patterned with water stains that looked like continents. He tried to think of numbers, the market open in 6 hours, the conference call rescheduled, the missed dinner with investors. But each thought slid away, replaced by the image of Claire bending over the monitor, her brow furrowed, her voice steady when everything else trembled. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled above the storm. The sound vibrated faintly through the floor, like the slow rumble of a tired heart learning to keep time again. He closed his eyes. The flutter had gone, but the echo of it lingered, a reminder that something inside him had shifted, ever so slightly, toward life. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, sealing the world shut once more. Morning felt impossibly far away. The generator hummed like a tired lullaby, steady but fragile. The storm had eased into a slow, whispering snow, the kind that muffled the world. The clinic, too, had gone still, patients sleeping, machines purring, lanterns burning low. Claire sat on a folding chair beside the window, a thermos between her palms. Across from her, Ethan slouched in another chair, blanket draped over his shoulders, hair damp from the melted snow. A single lamp cast a golden circle between them, small and soft like trust beginning to take shape. She poured from the thermos, steam rising. "Coffee," she said, handing him a cup. "It's terrible, but it's hot." He took a cautious sip, grimaced. "You weren't kidding. That's the secret to staying awake on call," she said, smiling faintly. "Your body rejects the flavor before the caffeine kicks in." He laughed under his breath, the sound low and honest. It startled both of them. For a while, they sat in the easy silence that only exhaustion can buy. The snow brushed softly against the window panes, and the light played over Claire's face, softer now than he'd seen it before. "Tired?" "Yes, but unguarded." "You've done this a lot, haven't you?" he asked finally. "What?" "Stay up all night with strangers. Keep everyone else alive." She looked into her coffee for a long time before answering. "Not everyone." He waited, letting the silence make room for her words. "I was 28, she said quietly. "Fellowship year. Trauma service at Harborview. We got a call, 23-year-old man. Motorcycle crash. Massive internal bleeding. We worked on him for 3 hours." I thought she stopped, breath catching like she'd hit a sharp corner inside herself. "I thought if I just did everything right, he'd live." Ethan said nothing. He didn't. She went on, and for the first time, I realized it wasn't about skill. It was about limits. I'd spent my whole life running from mine. Her voice faltered, but she smiled as if to soften the weight of it. "So, I left, packed a box, drove east until the road ended in Glacier Bend. Been here ever since." He studied her in the half-light, the courage in her admission. "You don't strike me as someone who runs." "I didn't," she said, "until I did." He nodded slowly. "We all have a breaking point. Yours." He hesitated. Then, quietly, "My mother. She got sick 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind you don't beat." Claire's eyes lifted, full of gentle attention. "I kept telling myself I'd visit," he said. "Just one more deal. One more quarter. Then I'd go. By the time I did, it was weeks before the end." She was still lucid enough to smile at me. I think she forgave me before I even said the words. He rubbed his face with both hands. I'd built my entire life around control, and there I was, completely powerless. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was shared, like two people leaning against the same wall from opposite sides. Claire reached across the small space between them, resting her hand lightly on his wrist. "You know," she said, "sometimes the only thing harder than saving someone is forgiving yourself when you can't." He looked at her hand, then at her. "Is that what you've done?" "Working on it." He smiled faintly. "You and me both." They drank in quiet again, the lamp flickering slightly. Somewhere down the hall, a patient coughed and turned over. The world outside was a wash of white. Ethan leaned back, letting his head rest against the wall. "You ever think," he said softly, "that maybe the people who end up saving others are the ones trying hardest to fix themselves?" Claire gave a small, knowing smile. "All the time." He chuckled. "Guess that makes me your next patient." She raised an eyebrow. "You're already on my chart." That earned another shared laugh, and for a moment the storm, the darkness. The long night, none of it mattered, only the warmth between them, unexpected and fragile. Claire stood to refill their cups, and when she turned back, a paper snowflake clung to the sleeve of his jacket, one of the cutouts the nurses had hung for the holidays. She plucked it off gently and smiled. "Consider it a souvenir." "Doesn't seem like me," he said. "Maybe it's time you change that." He tucked it into his pocket, surprising himself. "I'll keep it." The clock over the counter ticked past 3:30. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the corner, the radio crackled to life. Glacier Bend Clinic, this is dispatch, came a woman's voice, faint under static. We've got a call from Maple Ridge Farm female, 32 pregnant, complaining of cramps and bleeding. Claire was on her feet in an instant, professionalism snapping back into place. How far? 18 miles. Roads iced over. County plows won't clear till morning. Patch me through, she said, pulling the headset over her ears. After a click, another voice came on, thin, shaking. Hello, it's coming faster, please. I don't know what to do. Hi, this is Dr. Bennett, Claire said calmly, her tone a perfect metronome. You're safe. Okay, I'm here with you. What's your name, Jenny? Jenny, I need you to lie on your left side and take slow breaths. Can you tell me how far apart the cramps are? Ethan watched as Claire scribbled notes on a pad, her movements efficient, her voice steady. The woman on the other end whimpered, panicked, but Claire guided her through each moment as if they were in the same room. You're doing great, she said gently. I know you're scared. I need you to stay with me? Static flared. The signal wavered. Jenny, you still there? A faint sob. It hurts. Okay, I need you to. The line went dead. Claire froze. The radio hissed. Empty. She adjusted the dial. Tried again. Maple Ridge, this is Dr. Bennett, can you hear me? Nothing but the storm. Ethan stood slowly. Did it signal's gone? Her voice was flat, but her hands gripped the radio like it was a lifeline. The static filled the room, loud and hollow. Claire stared at the receiver, every muscle taut, as if by sheer will she could force a heartbeat to return. Ethan watched her in the lamplight steady, strong, but with eyes that betrayed the cost of caring too deeply for too long. The silence stretched. Outside, the wind began to rise again. The radio hissed for what felt like hours. Claire sat frozen beside it, headset still pressed to her ear, whispering into static like someone praying through a locked door. Ethan stood nearby, helpless, watching the tremor in her shoulders. Then crackle. A faint voice pushed through. Glacier Bend Clinic. This is County Dispatch. Maple Ridge reports both mother and baby stable. False labor. Minor dehydration. They're safe. For a heartbeat. Neither of them moved. Then Claire closed her eyes, exhaling as if the whole night had been balanced on that one breath. Copy that, she said softly. Thank you. The radio clicked off. Silence returned, but it was a different kind, now, softer, looser, like the clinic itself was breathing again. Ethan stepped closer. You okay? Claire nodded, though her voice was shaky. She's fine. They're fine. He handed her the thermos she'd left untouched. You sounded like you'd done that 100 times. She gave a tired laugh. Feels like 1,000. The storm had dwindled to a whisper against the glass, snow drifting down like feathers. The clinic's hum seemed louder now, the faint vibration of the generator, the rhythm of two people realizing how close they'd become through the long hours of waiting. Ethan leaned on the counter beside her. You didn't even flinch when the call came through. Just took charge. Habit, she said, but her cheeks warmed under the light. Besides, panic doesn't help anyone. It helps you feel alive, he said softly. Her eyes met his. You already proved your heart can handle that. He smiled, and something unspoken hung between them, a thin current of shared relief and something deeper. She sank into the chair by the window, rubbing her temples. I think my adrenaline finally quit. Mine too, he said. Feels like the first quiet moment in days. It's been one night, he chuckled. Longest one of my life. Outside. Dawn was still hours away. The lantern flickered on the table between them, casting long gold shadows. Ethan sat across from her, elbows on knees, watching the way she cradled her cup with both hands, as though she was afraid to let the warmth go. He wanted to say something that made sense of what had just happened, of the strange closeness that had grown out of fear, exhaustion, and trust. But words felt clumsy. So instead, he reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't pull away. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for a moment, neither moved. The air between them shifted no longer, doctor and patient, rescuer and rescued, but two people suspended in the rare stillness after chaos. "Ethan," she began, uncertain. He shook his head gently. "You don't have to say anything." Her hand found his, resting there as if it had always known where to go, their fingers intertwined, tentative at first, then sure. "I haven't let anyone in for a long time," she said quietly. "Maybe that's why tonight found us both," he replied. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a heater sighed. He leaned closer, close enough to see the fine lines near her eyes, the pulse at her throat. The kiss was soft, at first hesitant, a question more than an answer. When she didn't draw back, he deepened it, slow and deliberate, like they were both learning a language they'd once forgotten. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm she'd fought so hard to protect hours earlier. Still at 72, she murmured, almost smiling, "Guess I'm in good hands." She laughed, a low, tired sound that melted into his shoulder. The lantern light flickered again. He reached over and turned it down, the world shrinking to the warmth between them, the faint hum of electricity, and the hush of snow. They didn't talk about tomorrow, or about rules, or about what the world would look like when the roads reopened. There was only the pulse under his skin, the weight of her breath against his collarbone, the quiet proof that they were still here, still alive. Outside, the storm finally broke for good. The clouds thinned, letting starlight slip through like silver thread. Inside, they moved with the rhythm of that long night, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Later, when the power flickered back to full strength, the sudden brightness startled them both. The overhead lights blinked twice, sputtered, then steadied. "Guess the old beast's got some fight left," Claire said, laughing through the glow. Ethan brushed her hair from her face, smiling back. "Seems like everyone here does." For the first time, she didn't look away from him. Maybe that's the point. The generator gave a final groan, then settled into an even hum. They stood there, wrapped in the afterglow of both electricity and something much more fragile. As the night faded, the first hint of pale light crept over the pines outside the window. Snow dripped from the eaves in soft rivulets. A plow rumbled faintly somewhere far off on the highway, distant, but coming closer. Claire watched it, arms folded loosely. By noon, they'll have the roads open. Ethan nodded. "And you'll have patience again." She smiled, though her voice dropped to a whisper. "And you'll have somewhere to be." He didn't answer. The words hung between them like missed truth and farewell stitched together in the quiet. The snow kept falling, slower now, softer, until it seemed the whole world had exhaled. Neither of them said goodnight. By morning, the world had softened into silence. Snow blanketed the valley like clean linen, unbroken except for the path leading from the clinic door to the road where the plows had finally passed. The sun hung low, pale and forgiving after the long, violent night. Ethan stood near the entrance, coat zipped high, watching his breath curl into the cold air. Claire joined him, coffee in hand, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. The world looked new, like it had pressed the reset button while they slept. "You'll have a clear drive now," she said, nodding toward the highway. The crews came through around 6. He followed her gaze. The road cut through the snow like a ribbon of silver. "You make it sound like you're kicking me out." Her smile was tired but warm. "You've been cleared for discharge. Mr. Whitaker. Stable vitals. No arrhythmia. Good reflexes." He chuckled. "You sound like you're reading from a chart. Occupational hazard." They stood in companionable quiet for a moment, the steam from her cup curling between them. "I don't usually say this to patients," she said after a pause, "but thank you for being here last night. Sometimes it helps, having someone else awake." He turned to her, the morning light catching the edge of his jaw. It was more than that. "Claire." She didn't answer right away, just watched a crow land on the telephone wire, black against white. The night makes everything feel bigger than it is. Doesn't mean it wasn't real. Her eyes met his, calm, and unreadable. "No," she said softly. "It doesn't." Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple white business card. No title, no logo, just his name and a number written in clean blue ink. "If you ever need anything, equipment, supplies, a new generator, whatever, call me. No press releases, no strings." She took the card, turning it between her fingers. "You really think money fixes everything, don't you?" "I think it helps." Her mouth curved into a small, almost sad smile. "Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes what's broken isn't for sale." He nodded, absorbing the quiet sting of that truth. "Still, I meant it. I know." She slid the card into her pocket, but didn't look at him again. He wanted to say something else, to ask her what came next, to suggest coffee somewhere that didn't serve from a thermos, but the words refused to come. Instead, he held out his hand. She took it, firm and steady, as though sealing something that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too. Dr. Bennett." When he turned toward his SUV, the snow crunched beneath his boots, the sound crisp and final. She stood on the steps, one hand raised in a quiet wave that faded as he reached the road. His taillights glowed red for a moment, then disappeared behind the ridge. The wind picked up just enough to erase his tire tracks. Only their footprints remained two parallel paths in the powder, side by side for a while, then drifting apart. The clinic returned to its rhythm morning rounds. Lab results, the steady stream of locals dropping by with coughs and sprains and gossip. The world shrank back to its familiar size, but the night still echoed somewhere in Claire's chest. She found his card again days later while sorting her coat pockets. The edges were softened from handling, the ink slightly smudged from her thumb. She almost threw it out, then didn't. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The snow outside began to melt, pooling along the eaves in slow, rhythmic drips. The town shifted into late winter, a season of waiting. Claire told herself her body was just tired. Too many on-call shifts. Too many nights with lukewarm coffee and little sleep. Stress could do strange things to a woman's cycle, she reasoned. By the 4th week, she stopped reasoning. One evening, after the clinic had emptied, she sat alone in exam room 2 with the test beside her, a thin plastic stick resting on a paper towel. The clock ticked louder than usual. She wasn't sure why her hands shook. She'd delivered babies, consoled mothers, stood beside women through harder moments than this, but she had never been the one waiting for the answer. She glanced at the test again. A single pink line stared back. Then, slowly, another faint one began to bloom beside it, delicate, stubborn, undeniable. Her breath caught. For a long time, she just stared, her mind an ocean of quiet disbelief. It wasn't fear that came first. It was wonder. Then, slowly, the ache of realization how one wild night had stretched beyond itself, leaving something living, something she hadn't asked for, but couldn't reject. Claire pressed her hand against her abdomen, not yet feeling anything, only the warmth of her palm and the thrum of her pulse beneath it. The storm outside had long since passed, but she felt its echo inside her, the same mix of terror and awe, the same sense that life had changed direction while she wasn't looking. She reached into her pocket for Ethan's card. The white edge caught the light as she turned it over, tracing his name with her thumb. No strings, he'd said. But life, she thought, always finds its own way to tie two people together. The room felt impossibly still. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows, scattering the last bits of snow from the roof. Claire looked toward the sound, her eyes bright but unreadable. The faint plus sign on the test deepened, the color settling, certain. Her breath left her in a single, steady sigh, half laugh, half prayer. The nausea came first. It wasn't gentle, the kind that fades with tea or a few slow breaths, but sharp, insistent, the body's way of reminding her that something invisible was already claiming space inside her. At 6:00, Claire sat on the edge of her bed, one hand gripping the nightstand, the other clutching a sleeve of saltine crackers. The world outside her window glowed with the faint blue of pre-dawn. Snow still lingered in the pines, but the air had softened. Spring was near. She waited for the queasiness to pass, chewing one dry cracker after another, eyes unfocused on the half-open blinds. The clinic would open in an hour. She'd have to pull herself together, smile at patients, make small talk, pretend nothing inside her had shifted. But it had. Later that morning, she stood in exam room 3, her own exam room, wearing the same calm expression she always did, though her hands trembled just enough to betray her. On the other side of the portable ultrasound screen stood Dr. Melissa Graham, a close friend and one of the few who knew Claire well enough not to ask too many questions. 8 weeks. Right, Melissa asked gently, applying gel to the probe. About that, Claire murmured, "All right, let's take a look." The room filled with the hum of the old machine. Claire stared at the monitor, expecting to see a single small blur, a heartbeat, maybe 2. What she saw instead made her breath stop. 2 tiny sacs, 2 flickers of light. "Wait," she whispered. Melissa smiled softly. 2 embryos. Both look strong. "Congratulations." "Mama." The word mama hung in the air, heavier than the rest. Claire's throat tightened. Twins. Melissa confirmed. Heartbeat A at 168, B at 162. Perfect little rhythm section you've got there. The sound came next to the steady, rapid drum of 2 tiny hearts, out of sync, but alive. The noise filled the small room, impossibly loud for something so small. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. "I wasn't expecting." "Most people aren't," Melissa said kindly. "You're healthy, strong. You'll handle this." Claire nodded, unable to speak. She watched the 2 flickers pulse again and again, fragile yet defiant, like fireflies refusing to die in a storm. When the exam ended, she dressed in silence, slipping her stethoscope back around her neck by instinct, as though it might steady her. Melissa offered to talk, but Claire just smiled, whispered thanks, and left through the side door into the gray morning. Outside, the snow had melted into patches of wet earth. The air smelled like thawing pine and diesel from the snowplows. She climbed into her truck, started the engine, then turned it off again. For a long time, she just sat there. The ultrasound photos rested on the passenger seat, ghostly black and white shapes that already felt sacred. She traced the edges of the paper, then placed a palm over her still flat stomach. 2. A laugh escaped her, half joy, half disbelief. Then came the tears, unrestrained, messy, real. She laughed and cried at once, the sound muffled by the cab of the truck. Of all the things she'd lost and rebuilt, this was the one she never saw coming. When the tears finally slowed, she reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over Ethan's number, still saved from that night. She typed, "I need to tell you something," then stopped, deleted, typed again. "It's not what either of us planned, but," deleted. "Third time you deserve to know." She stared at the blinking cursor, her pulse quickening. What if he saw it as a complication, a mistake? What if he offered help out of guilt instead of choice? No, she thought, not like that. She locked the phone and set it face down on the seat. The hum of the truck's heater filled the silence, soft and constant. Through the windshield, a pale sun began to break through the clouds, spilling light across the snow. She took a deep breath and pressed her hand once more to her stomach. "Hey," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's you and me now. You two." Something steadied inside her as she said it, a quiet strength rising from the same place all her resolve had always come from, the place that had carried her through loss, exhaustion, endless nights. She started the truck again, shifting into gear. The road ahead curved toward the mountains, glistening with meltwater. Claire had spent years fixing what was broken in others. Now, for the first time, she was carrying something that didn't need fixing, only protecting. By the time she reached the clinic parking lot, her face had dried, her hands no longer shook. She tucked the ultrasound photos into her bag, their corners peeking out like secrets waiting for the right time. Inside, the day unfolded as usual. Check-ins, prescriptions, the steady rhythm of rural medicine. But beneath it all, her heart beat to a new tempo. 2 small drums echoing in memory. Around mid-afternoon, As she updated patient charts, her phone buzzed against the desk. She glanced at it absently, then froze. A Seattle area code. Her breath caught. The screen flashed the name she'd typed into her contacts weeks ago, not daring to delete Ethan Whitaker. She stared at it, heartbeat climbing, torn between answering and pretending she hadn't seen it. The phone buzzed again, insistent. Outside the window, the wind lifted the last bits of snow from the roof, scattering them like white ash across the spring air. She reached for the phone, then hesitated, just long enough for the call to stop. The screen went black, reflecting her own face back at her strong, frightened, and suddenly not alone. By the time Ethan's plane landed in Kalispell, the clouds had thickened to a dull pewter gray. The slush on the tarmac reflected the taxi lights, and the air smelled faintly of jet fuel and thawing snow. He hadn't planned this trip, hadn't planned any of it, but when Claire's text came through 2 nights ago, short and trembling, "We need to talk. In person." Something in him knew it wasn't a conversation for a screen. 2 hours later, he was driving through the Bitterroot Valley, a rental SUV fishtailing over half-frozen roads. The GPS insisted the route was clear. It wasn't. But he kept going anyway, past pine stands heavy with old snow and frozen rivers glinting like cracked glass. By the time he pulled into Glacier Bend, dusk had already fallen. The clinic's lights burned low against the storm-colored sky. Claire stood outside, coat buttoned to the neck, one hand tucked in her pocket, the other wrapped around a paper coffee cup that had gone cold long ago. She saw the headlights before she heard the engine and straightened, heart beating so fast she could feel it behind her ribs. She'd spent all morning rehearsing the words, only to lose them every time she tried. Now there was no time left for practice. Ethan parked near the steps, the tires crunching through icy slush. He climbed out, shutting the door softly. The air between them filled with vapor from their breath, white in the cold. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she answered. The wind caught a strand of her hair and pulled it across her cheek. He resisted the urge to reach out, to tuck it behind her ear. "I didn't expect you to actually come," she said. "I wasn't sure you wanted me to." They stood for a moment, neither moving closer, the distance between them filled with everything they hadn't said. "I didn't know how to tell you," Claire began. "I tried. I almost called a dozen times." Something wrong. His voice softened, worried. She let out a breath that clouded the air. "Not wrong, just unexpected." Her hand slipped into her coat pocket and came out holding a small envelope. Inside were the ultrasound photos creased at the corners from how many times she'd opened them. She handed it to him without a word. He took it, brow furrowing, then opening the flap. For a moment, he just stared at the images, the gray static, the faint twin shadows pulsing side by side. When he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Claire, I found out 3 weeks ago," she said quickly. "I wasn't sure at first if I should tell you, or how, but you deserve to know." He looked up, and she saw everything flicker across his face: shock, disbelief, wonder, fear. "You're pregnant." She nodded. 8 weeks, and his eyes dropped back to the photo. 2. Her lips curved faintly. 2. He blinked, the cold catching at his breath. Twins. Twins. She almost smiled. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft rush of wind over the parking lot, the crunch of melting snow underfoot. Then he stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "You're sure I saw their heartbeats myself?" He exhaled, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Of course you did." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "I didn't plan for this. I don't expect anything from you. Ethan, you don't owe me." "Stop." He took another step, closing the space between them. "Don't say that." She looked up at him, searching his face for the things she wanted to believe. "I'm in," he said quietly. "I mean it. Whatever this is, however it looks, I want to be part of it." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to decide that standing in a parking lot in 30 degrees. I've made harder decisions in worse weather," he said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. But she saw the tremor behind his eyes, the flicker of fear he was trying to bury under confidence. She understood it. It matched her own. I don't even know what this means yet, she said softly. For either of us. We'll figure it out. How? He hesitated, then shook his head, one day at a time. Her laugh broke like frost under sunlight small. Brittle, but real. That's not a strategy. Ethan, it's all I've got. She wanted to believe him. She almost did. The wind picked up, carrying the faint, metallic smell of snowmelt and exhaust. He tucked the ultrasound photo into his jacket, close to his chest. I'm scared too, he admitted. But when I look at that picture, I don't feel regret. I feel he searched for the word, found it halfway through a breath. Grateful. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice, again. He ignored it, but the vibration persisted until he finally glanced down. The screen glowed bright against the dimming sky. Coup urgent. Deal collapsing. Need your decision. Call now. He turned the phone face down on the hood of the car, the sound of its vibration against the metal sharp in the cold air. Claire's voice was quiet. Go ahead. It's important. So is this. Ethan. He shook his head. I've spent my whole life chasing numbers, and they've never looked back. But this. He gestured between them, the space where his breath mingled with hers. This might actually matter. The phone buzzed again, a small, insistent sound that felt louder than the wind. His jaw tightened. She studied him, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the invisible pull between two worlds, duty and choice, empire and heart. Finally, he picked up the phone, thumb hovering over answer. The screen lit his face, all sharp edges and fatigue. Then, slowly, he pressed the side button. The screen went dark. Silence returned. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked at her. New York can wait, he said softly. She blinked. Are you sure? No, he admitted. But I'm staying anyway. Something fragile shifted in her chest, relief wrapped in fear, gratitude tangled with guilt. For a moment, they just stood there, breath fogging the air, the first stars faint above the ridgeline. Come inside, she said finally. It's freezing. He smiled, teeth white in the dusk. Lead the way. As they walked back toward the clinic, their footsteps fell in rhythm. Behind them, the parking lot lights flickered on, and the phone in his pocket buzzed once more, then fell silent. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. By late March, the snow had given way to mud and the first signs of green pushing through the thaw. Glacier Bend was slowly waking from its long winter sleep. But inside the small clinic office, Claire's world had narrowed to the rhythmic sound of heartbeats, two of them fluttering through the Doppler like distant wings. Ethan sat in the corner, half awe, half disbelief, watching the screen as though it were a miracle he wasn't qualified to witness. They're strong, Claire said softly. You can hear the difference now, one slightly faster than the other. He nodded, eyes fixed on the monitor, like they already have opinions. Get used to that, she said, smiling faintly. He grinned, but behind it was a tension she recognized, the restlessness of a man trying to be in two places at once. For every moment he spent here, he left another undone somewhere else. When she finished the checkup, he followed her into the hallway, hands deep in his coat pockets. Claire, I've been thinking. That sounds ominous. He exhaled, fogging the glass of the clinic door. I don't want to keep flying back and forth like this. It's not sustainable. She folded her arms, cautious. I agree. So I've been looking at houses here. Something near the ridge, close enough to the clinic, but big enough for her eyes widened. Ethan, an office setup, he added quickly. I can handle West Coast operations remotely. We're launching telehealth pilots anyway. I could use Glacier Bend as the first test site. Her brow furrowed. You'd bring your company here. Why not, he said. The infrastructure's already in place. The clinic could use funding, and you'd have access to specialists without sending patients hours away. She stared at him, half incredulous, half impressed. You make it sound so simple. I'm a businessman, he said. We live off simple pitches. For the first time in weeks, she laughed, genuine, warm, unexpected. and what happens when your board realizes their CEO has decided to move to a town with one stoplight, they'll live, he said lightly, though something flickered behind his eyes. 2 days later, his board didn't sound like they were living. Ethan sat at Claire's kitchen table, laptop open, jacket off, coffee cooling beside a stack of financial projections. The morning light slanted through the window, catching the steam from his mug. On screen, 12 faces appeared in tidy rectangles, his board of directors, polished and impatient. "Ethan," said Martin Hale, the CFO, his tone tight, "we've been patient with your field work, but Singapore is slipping. Investors are nervous. If we miss another quarter target, you'll still turn a profit." Ethan interrupted, "A healthy one. That's not the issue." Martin snapped, "The issue is optics. You vanish for weeks, refuse to attend meetings, and rumor has it you're relocating to Montana. What exactly is going on?" Ethan glanced toward the window where Claire stood outside, talking to a patient by her truck. Her breath hung in the cold air, sunlight glinting off her hair. "I'm becoming a father," he said simply. The screen fell silent. Finally, one of the women on the call, Rebecca Lang, the senior director of strategy, spoke. "Congratulations," she said carefully. "But may I ask, how does that affect your position here?" "It doesn't," Ethan replied. "It clarifies it. I'm splitting time between New York and Glacier Bend. I'll maintain oversight remotely, and I'll be setting up a new telehealth initiative out here that aligns with our mission statement." "Mission statement," Martin repeated, almost laughing. "Ethan, our mission is growth, expansion. You can't run a company like Cross Ventures part-time from a clinic in the woods. I built this company from the ground up," Ethan said, his tone calm but firm. "And I'm not asking for permission to be a father. You're asking for leniency," another board member said coldly. Ethan leaned back, gaze steady. "No, I'm setting boundaries. Boundaries don't pay shareholders." Martin shot back. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then maybe you need a new definition of value." The silence that followed was long and heavy. He could almost hear the gears turning in 12 different minds, all calculating, all assessing the cost of his humanity. Finally, Rebecca spoke again. "Ethan, you're an excellent CEO, but this kind of unpredictability worries people. We have to protect the brand. The brand is fine," he said. "The leadership might need to evolve." "Evolve," Martin echoed. "You mean bend around your personal life?" Ethan's patience snapped. "I mean, stop pretending that being chained to a boardroom 24/7 is the only way to measure dedication." He leaned forward, voice steady now, each word deliberate. "I'm not derailing timelines. I'm realigning priorities. If that's unacceptable," he looked directly into the camera, "then you'll need to find another suit." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. On the screen, faces flickered, some shocked, some thoughtful, a few downright furious. Rebecca sighed softly. "You realize what you're saying?" "Ethan, I do." "Then we'll need to convene privately to discuss next steps. Take all the time you need." He reached for the laptop lid, ready to end the call. But before he could close it, a voice spoke, off camera low, male, unfamiliar. "We will." The screen went black. Ethan sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen, the ticking of the old wall clock suddenly very loud. Outside, he could see Claire crouched beside an elderly patient's car, adjusting a bandage, her laugh faint through the glass. He exhaled slowly, shoulders heavy but unbowed. For the first time in years, he wasn't entirely sure what came next, but he knew why he'd done it. When Claire came back inside, cheeks flushed from the cold, she saw the look on his face. How bad, she asked. He managed a small smile. "Depends on your definition of freedom." She handed him a steaming mug of tea. "You really told them that I did, and they'll replace you." He stared into the dark swirl of the tea, the faint reflection of her beside him. "Maybe." She set the mug down, gently touching his shoulder. "Then we'll figure it out." He met her gaze. The weight of the world balanced in that one shared promise. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across the melting snow. For a moment, The kitchen glowed two people, one choice, and the uncertain horizon beyond. It began with the flicker of light. Not lightning, not yet just a shimmer at the edge of Claire's vision, like someone waving a small mirror in the sun. She blinked it away. But the sparkle returned, floating across the chart she was reviewing. Then came the headache, a dull, pulsing weight behind her eyes that refused to fade. Long morning, her nurse, Denise, asked, handing her a blood pressure cuff. "Feels like it," Claire murmured, wrapping it around her own arm out of habit. The monitor beeped twice, then displayed a number that made her frown 150 over 95. Denise's smile vanished. "That's higher than usual." "It's been creeping up," Claire admitted. "Probably stress. Or not just stress." Denise's voice softened. "You're 28 weeks. Claire, we should check for protein." Claire hesitated, then nodded. She knew the protocol she'd given it 100 times herself to worried mothers. The same calm tone, the same reassurance. But sitting on the exam table with her sleeve rolled up, she felt the faintest tremor of unease crawl up her spine. Denise left with a sample. Claire leaned back against the wall, one hand on her stomach. The twins shifted gently, a soft ripple under her palm. "Easy," she whispered. "We're fine." She wanted to believe it. An hour later, the concern in Denise's eyes said everything before the words did. "There's trace protein," she said quietly. "We need to keep a close watch." "I'll run the labs again this afternoon," Claire said automatically, slipping into her professional cadence. Denise reached out, touched her arm. "Don't do that thing where you turn into your own doctor. You know what this means." Claire managed a small, steady smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It means I monitor, hydrate, rest, and don't panic." "Exactly. Except you won't rest, because you never do." The corners of Claire's smile faltered. By late afternoon, the headache had deepened. She closed her office blinds, turned off the light, and sat in the quiet dark. The hum of the clinic generator was a faint reminder of last winter's storm that night that had rewritten everything. Now, months later, the same hum sounded like a warning. Her phone vibrated on the desk. "Ethan." She hesitated, then answered. "Hey," his voice came through, low, warm. "I was about to head into a meeting, but I wanted to check on you. How are my 3 favorite people? We're okay." He caught the pause immediately. "Claire, what happened?" "Nothing serious," she said too quickly. "Just a little elevated blood pressure." "How elevated?" She exhaled, pressing her fingers to her temple. 150 over 95. There was silence on the other end. Then, softly, "That's not a little, Claire. I know what it means. I'm monitoring." "You're going to the hospital," he said. "I'm not." "You are," Ethan replied, his voice now carrying the steel edge of someone used to being obeyed, not from arrogance, but fear. "I'm getting on a plane." Ethan, he'd already hung up. He landed in Kalispell just before dusk, renting the same SUV he'd driven through snow months before. The roads were wet now, bordered by slush and patches of early spring grass. The mountain peaks loomed dark in the distance, capped in ice. He drove faster than he should have, gripping the wheels so tightly his knuckles whitened. Every turn of the tires echoed with memory, the storm, the crash, the woman in the black coat pulling him from the snow. Now she was the one he had to reach in time. When he finally pulled into the clinic's gravel lot, the last streaks of daylight had drained from the sky. He barely shut the door before pushing through the glass entrance. Denise looked up from the nurse's station, startled. "She's in exam too," the nurse said. "Vitals are stable." But he was already halfway down the hall. Claire sat on the exam table, her hair pulled back, hospital gown loose at the shoulders. The monitor beside her beeped steadily, twin heartbeats flashing across the screen, 2 tiny drummers still keeping time. Her face lit with tired relief. "You made it. You said you were fine," he said, voice thick with worry. "You're not fine. I didn't want to alarm you until we knew more. Claire." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this alone." Her lips trembled, and for the first time in months, she didn't argue. The ER physician entered, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and the posture of someone who'd seen every kind of emergency. He greeted them both, flipping through her chart. "Dr. Bennett, your labs suggest early preeclampsia," he said. "We're admitting you for monitoring, bed rest, IV fluids, and we'll keep a close eye on those numbers." Claire nodded, her calm, deliberate, practiced. "For how long?" "As long as it takes." He replied, "We want to buy the baby's time." Ethan reached for her hand without thinking. She let him take it, her fingers cool against his. "I can't stay in bed for 6 weeks," she murmured. "My patients will survive," the doctor said gently. "Right now, your job is to stay still." Something in her posture finally gave. She leaned back, shoulders sagging, hand still locked in Ethan's. When the doctor left, the room settled into soft machine sounds, the steady rhythm of 3 heartbeats hers and 2 smaller ones layered above. "I hate this," she whispered. "Being the one in the bed." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Then think of it as being the one protecting them. You've done it for everyone else. Let me do it for you." She closed her eyes, the tension slowly easing. "I don't know how to stop. Then I'll sit here until you remember." Outside, the sky thickened. Heavy clouds piled above the mountains, rolling in from the northwest. The window pane trembled faintly with the first low growl of thunder. Ethan looked toward it, jaw tight, a storm reflected in his eyes. Claire followed his gaze. "You notice it too?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Feels like déjà vu." The monitor beside them flickered with another round of heartbeats, quick and steady. She exhaled, voice steady again. "Last time, the storm brought you to me." He squeezed her hand. "Then let it come." Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping across the valley. The clouds folded over one another like dark mountains forming in the sky. The storm waited, watching. And this time, they both knew what it might bring. The first thunder rolled across the valley just after midnight. A low, distant growl, at first then another, closer, shaking the clinic windows. The storm that had been brooding on the horizon for days had finally arrived. Inside room 314, Claire stirred. Her head ached, her vision blurred at the edges again. The monitor beside her flickered numbers. She didn't like blood pressure, 165 over 100. A cold wash of fear threaded through her, not for herself, but for the 2 small lives pressing against her ribs. "Denise," she called softly. Her voice barely reached the door. Within seconds, the nurse appeared, eyes wide and already knowing. "We're paging Dr. Givens," Denise said, wrapping a cuff around her arm again. "Lie back, honey." The lightning flashed a split second of white so bright it burned through the blinds. The generator's hum faltered, then steadied, a warning tremor through the floor. Claire tried to focus on her breathing in, out, in like she'd coached 100 patients through their own crises, but each inhale felt smaller. "Where's Ethan?" she asked, breath catching. "He's on his way. He didn't leave the hospital." "Good," she thought. "Stay." The door burst open. Ethan was already in scrubs, the color wrong against his pale face. His hair was damp, rain dripping from his jacket. "Talk to me," he said to the doctor now entering behind him. "Dr. Givens didn't waste time. Pressure's climbing, platelets dropping. We've hit the line, severe preeclampsia. We can't wait any longer." Meaning, Ethan asked, "Delivery tonight?" Claire blinked, her breath catching. 34 weeks. Givens met her gaze. "They're ready enough. Claire, you're not." Her laugh cracked at the edges. "Story of my life." The doctor's hand squeezed her shoulder. "You know the risks. We've got NICU transport en route, generators stable, anesthesia's prepped." Claire nodded once, the practiced calm of a woman who'd lived her entire career inside decisions like this. Only this time, she wasn't the one giving orders. Ethan stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching the flurry of motion IV lines, surgical trays, the shuffle of rubber soles. The air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. His chest felt too tight to breathe. "Mr. Whitaker, doctor," Givens said gently. "You can scrub in if you'd like." She'll need you in the OR. He nodded, already moving. The hallway outside the operating room glowed under backup lights, a strange yellow-gray that made everything look dreamlike. Ethan stood at the scrub sink, hands trembling under the stream of water. His reflection in the stainless steel panel looked like a stranger, a man who had run companies, made deals, flown across oceans, and yet never felt so utterly powerless. He whispered under his breath, a prayer he hadn't said since childhood. Just let them live. All three. Please. When he entered the OR, Claire was already prepped, blue drapes across her abdomen, eyes half closed. Machines beeped steady rhythms, some too fast, some too slow. Lightning cracked again outside, and for a brief instant, everything in the room froze, the power dipping. The generator coughing back to life with a low growl. Ethan moved closer, taking Claire's hand where it lay taped with IV lines. The scar on his wrist brushed against her fingers. "Hey," she whispered, voice fragile but calm. "Didn't think you'd handle scrubs so well." He tried to smile. "You've been saying that about my suits for months. Guess I'm rubbing off on you." The anesthesiologist nodded to Dr. Givens. "Ready." Time began to stretch, bending around each sound, the suction hiss, the clink of metal, the whispered exchange of instruments. Ethan focused on Claire's hand, counting the slow, steady pulse beneath her skin, then a sound so small and fierce it split the silence, a cry, thin but alive. "Doctor." Givens lifted a tiny, wrinkled form into view. "Avery Jane," he announced, passing her to the neonatal nurse. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Ethan felt his knees weaken. He looked down at Claire, tears streaming down her temples, a laugh trembling through her exhaustion. "Do you hear her?" she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak. Moments later, another cry joined the first, softer, lower, like an echo, finding its way home. "Miles, Ethan," Givens said. 3 pounds, 15. The sound filled the room, 2 fragile heartbeats made audible, proof that love could divide and multiply at the same time. The nurses worked quickly, clearing airways, wrapping the babies in warm blankets the color of dawn. 2 small hats, 2 small faces. Avery's lips pursed in protest. Miles's hand flinched against the air. Ethan followed the nurses with his eyes until they reached the warming table. The glow of the heat lamp painted the twins in gold. He counted both tiny chests rise and fall. "They're breathing," he said, half to himself. "They're perfect," Claire whispered. Her eyelids fluttered, exhaustion pulling at her features. The anesthesiologist adjusted her IV, murmuring reassurance. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected, voice fading to a whisper. The neonatal team prepared for transport to the regional NICU, securing both incubators onto portable stands. The room hummed with soft, efficient movement. Ethan turned back to Claire, torn between the 2 worlds, one on the gurney, one already halfway down the hall. Her hand reached for him again, weak but sure. She caught his wrist, fingers pressing against the faint scar that had never quite faded. "Don't leave them," she said, her voice barely audible under the machines. "I won't," he promised, tears blurring his vision. "Not just them," she whispered. "Me too." The thunder outside deepened, rolling across the mountains like the sound of something ancient. The generator flickered once, twice, then steadied a pulse in sync with the new rhythm of their lives. Ethan bent close, his forehead against hers. "You're safe," he said. "All of you. I swear it." But as he straightened, watching the nurses wheel the incubators toward the corridor, a sliver of fear lodged deep in his chest that promises, no matter how sincere, were still fragile things. The OR doors swung open. The wind howled through the narrow seam before closing again, leaving behind only the hum of the generator, the faint cries of 2 newborns, and the echo of a vow made in thunder. Outside, the storm pressed its hand against the windows, lightning walking the ridges like a restless god. Inside, 3 hearts kept beating, fragile, fierce, and faithful. Hospitals never really sleep. They hum soft and constant, like a living organism that dreams with its eyes open. In the neonatal intensive care unit, the air was warm and dry, filled with the whisper of oxygen lines and the faint, rhythmic beeps that measured the world in heartbeats. Ethan stood at the glass divider, watching his children. Avery's tiny hand was curled under her chin, her fingers no bigger than the tip of his thumb. Miles slept beside her, smaller but fierce, in the way his chest rose and fell steady, defiant, alive. Each of them wore a knitted hat the color of dawn, one pale yellow, one sky blue. Claire had laughed softly when the nurses pulled them on, saying they looked like acorns with opinions. Now, lying there beneath the soft light, they looked impossibly complete. He pressed his palm against the glass, the faint warmth bleeding through. They're here, he thought. They're real. A nurse appeared beside him, her voice gentle but firm. She's awake enough now. Mr. Whitaker, you can hold them if you'd like. For a heartbeat, he froze. Him, the man who'd negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, suddenly afraid to move. But then she placed Avery against his bare chest, skin to skin, her tiny body radiating fragile heat. He felt her heartbeat sink to his, fast, then slowing, as though recognizing the rhythm she'd heard before birth. He wrapped a soft blanket around her and sat in the rocking chair, afraid even to breathe too loud. Claire's voice drifted from the nearby bed, faint but smiling. "You look terrified." He glanced over. She was propped up with pillows, pale but steady, her IV lines coiled neatly beside her like silver threads. "I am," he admitted. "She's the size of a coffee mug." "That coffee mug just survived a thunderstorm," Claire said softly. "She's tougher than both of us." He smiled, looking back down at Avery. The nurse adjusted a sensor, then stepped back. "You're a natural, Mr. Whitaker." He almost laughed. "I've been called a lot of things. Never that." Hours passed in slow circles of light and hums and whispered reassurances. He read aloud from one of the children's books Claire's sister had brought, Goodnight Moon, his voice low, calm, steadying both the babies and himself. By the second night, he could tell their cries apart. Avery's was high and sharp, like a spark catching wind. Miles's was lower, more deliberate, as if he were still considering whether the world was worth the noise. At 2:00 May, a nurse touched his shoulder. "You should sleep," she said kindly. "I am," he murmured, without looking up. Claire's soft laughter came from her bed. "You'll regret saying that in a few months." He looked at her, eyes tired but content. "I already don't." 2 days later, his phone buzzed again, the tone he'd learned to dread. He stepped into the hallway to answer, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't wake the sleeping twins. "Ethan," came Martin Hale's clipped tone. "We sent the papers. If you don't sign the transition agreement by Monday, the board moves to replace you." Ethan leaned against the window, watching dawn stain the mountains. "I read them, and I'm not signing." A silence, sharp as glass. "You'll lose control of your company." "I already did," Ethan said quietly. "The second I let it matter more than people." "Don't do this," Martin warned. "You're throwing away everything you built." He looked through the glass into the NICU 2 incubators, 2 small lives tethered to monitors that blinked like stars. Claire was asleep, her face turned toward them even in rest. "I'm not throwing it away," he said softly. "I'm giving it meaning." He hung up before Martin could respond. By the end of that week, he did something no one at Cross Ventures expected. He sold his controlling block of shares not to a rival, but to a foundation created in the clinic's name. The proceeds went into 3 things: a new generator for Glacier Bend Medical, a telehealth expansion linking rural Montana to big city specialists, and housing for the traveling nurses who kept the clinic alive during winter storms. When the news broke, the business press called it reckless. Investors used words like sentimental, unstrategic, career suicide. But when Claire heard, she only smiled, her fingers tracing the photo taped above her hospital bed, 2 newborns swaddled together under one blanket. "You really did it," she whispered when he came back that night. "I did." "And you're okay with that?" He shrugged, sitting beside her bed. "Turns out I didn't like being a headline anyway." "What will you do now?" "Hold what matters," he said. Then, after a pause, "and build something that lasts longer than quarterly reports." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You already have." He glanced toward the NICU window. Inside, The nurses adjusted monitors, soft laughter rippling like lullabies. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. "Not in any plan I ever made," he said, which is probably why it worked. They sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of machines and the snow starting to fall again outside late spring flakes that drifted lazily against the glass. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, watching the twins. "You know," he murmured, "I used to measure success by what I could control." And now he smiled slow, genuine, the kind that comes only after surviving something that almost broke you. "Now I measure it by what I'm willing to hold." A nurse wheeled in the second incubator, ready for another round of skin-to-skin care. Ethan stood, washing his hands, pulling the soft blanket into place. Miles stirred, blinking up at him with unfocused eyes. "Hey, little man," Ethan whispered. "Welcome to the world." He lifted his son against his chest, feeling that impossibly small weight settle there, heartbeat against heartbeat. The monitor steadied, the numbers glowing green. Behind him, Claire watched, her eyes glistening not from exhaustion, but from something far deeper pride, gratitude, love earned the hard way. The room was quiet except for the sound of rain and two small machines keeping time. Ethan looked down at the twins, Avery in her incubator, Miles against his heart, and for the first time, the constant hum inside him went still. No deadlines. No noise, just breath. Two chests rose and fell in perfect rhythm. He smiled, not like a man who'd lost everything, but like one who had finally come home. By late June, Glacier Bend had shaken off its winter entirely. The pines stood in full green armor, the air rich with the scent of thawed earth and river water. The storm season had passed, and in its place came long, generous days that seemed to linger out of kindness. Inside the clinic, nurses moved briskly between patient rooms, but in the maternity wing, time ran slower. The twins, Avery Jane and Miles Ethan, were finally ready to go home. 7 pounds each now, strong and loud and endlessly hungry. They had transformed from fragile whispers into small, fierce declarations of life. When they cried, the sound was whole. When they breathed, the monitors no longer dictated the rhythm. Ethan stood by the window, sunlight spilling across his shirt sleeves, watching the nurse fasten the last car seat straps. "They look ready to run marathons," he said. "Give them 6 months," Claire replied, smiling as she checked the discharge papers. Her hair was longer now, tied back with a blue ribbon the nurse had gifted her. Her cheeks held color again. He reached over, touching her hand lightly. "You okay? Better than I thought I'd ever be," she said, voice soft but steady. "Though I might never sleep again." He grinned. "You'll get used to it. I hear caffeine helps." "Funny," she said, coming from the man who used to schedule phone calls across 3 time zones. "Used to," he said. "Not anymore." She looked up at him, really looking this time. "You mean that?" He nodded. "Completely." The house sat on Willow Road, a narrow lane that curved behind the ridge. It wasn't big 2 bedrooms, a wide porch, the kind of place where every floorboard spoke when you walked. A hand-painted mailbox leaned slightly to one side. Ethan had found it while she was still on bed rest, driving back roads to clear his head. When he saw the for sale sign half buried in snow, something inside him had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like recognition. Now, months later, he stood on that same porch, holding open the screen door that creaked and sang on its hinge. Claire stepped through first, balancing Avery in her arms while Miles slept against Ethan's chest. The smell of cedar and new paint filled the entryway. There were boxes stacked against the walls, the kind labeled Kitchen Fragile and Books Hers. But in the middle of the living room, beneath a single lamp, sat something smaller, a square box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a thin cord. Claire frowned. "You didn't have to." "It's not what you think," he said quickly, almost shy. "Just open it." She untied the cord, unfolded the paper, and lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a piece of tissue, sat 2 tiny hospital bracelets, their names engraved in soft black letters, set inside a square of clear glass. Avery Jane Whitaker. Miles Ethan Whitaker. Claire's breath caught. Ethan cleared his throat. They cut them off the morning we left the NICU. I couldn't throw them away, so I had them framed. I thought maybe. Her fingers brushed the glass. Maybe what? He hesitated, then smiled. Maybe we'd hang them by the front door. So we never forget the day we walked out of that hospital and started over. Claire's eyes filled. She traced the bracelets again, her voice almost a whisper. You remember every detail, don't you? Every second. She looked up at him, the man who had walked through storms, walked away from everything he'd built, and somehow found something far greater waiting in the quiet. He shifted Miles gently to his other shoulder. I didn't get you a ring, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Good start. He smiled, nervous now, not from uncertainty, but from wanting to get it right. I thought about it. I even looked at some, but every time I did, it felt wrong, because I don't want to start something that way, not with ceremony or expectation. He paused, searching her eyes. Marry me when you're ready. Or don't. I'm here either way. The room fell still, sunlight slanting through the windows, dust motes turning like gold in the air. Claire looked down at the bracelets again, then back up at him. You already know my answer, she said. I'd still like to hear it. She smiled, the kind that trembles before it steadies. Yes, but you already knew. He exhaled, a small, disbelieving laugh breaking through his chest. I did. She reached up, tucking a hand behind his neck, pulling him down until their foreheads met. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The twins stirred between them, small sounds of contentment filling the silence. The porch creaked as the wind moved across it. Somewhere outside, a bird began to sing the same call it had made in spring when the snow first began to melt. Evening came gently. The lamp behind the sheer curtains glowed a soft amber, casting the room in quiet warmth. Two cribs stood side by side beneath the window, the twins asleep, their breaths almost in sync. Claire sat in the rocking chair, watching them with the same awe she'd felt that night in the OR, awe that hadn't faded, only deepened. Ethan moved through the small kitchen, sleeves rolled up, rinsing bottles with the precision of a man learning the steps of a sacred ritual. The rhythm of ordinary life, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the chair, the steady ticking of the old wall clock wrapped around them like a lullaby. He dried his hands, glanced toward the counter, and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled his watch, the same silver one he'd worn through every meeting, every deal, every long flight that had once defined his days. He turned it over once in his hand, the face catching the lamplight. Then, quietly, he opened the drawer beside the sink and set it inside. The soft click of the drawer closing sounded almost like a heartbeat. Claire looked up. What are you doing? Leaving time where it belongs, he said simply. She smiled, rocking slowly, her eyes on him, on the twins, on the life that had unfolded like a gift no one could have planned. Outside, the wind slipped through the pines, carrying the faint scent of rain. The mountains stood in the distance, dark against the stars, keeping their quiet promises. And inside, under the golden light, 4 heartbeats found their rhythm steady, strong, and, finally, home. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, not in the grand gestures or perfect plans, but in the quiet moments that catch us off guard. Ethan and Claire didn't find love in candlelight or calm. They found it in the storm, when everything familiar fell apart. Life has a way of stripping us down to what truly matters. It takes away our schedules, our control, our certainty, until all that's left is the heartbeat of someone beside us, the warmth of a hand that doesn't let go. Their story reminds us that love isn't always about choosing the right time. Sometimes it's about choosing to stay when everything else says to run. And maybe the truest kind of wealth isn't measured in what we build, but in what we hold close, a child's breath against your chest, the steadiness of someone who believes in you, and the peace that comes when you finally stop racing the clock and just live. Thank you for being here with us. For every minute you've spent listening, for every emotion you've allowed yourself to feel, we're deeply grateful. At Shining Stories, we believe that kindness still matters, that empathy can travel farther than distance, and that a story, told with heart, can remind someone they're not alone. Every like, every share, and every subscribe helps us keep telling stories that touch the soul, stories about love that heals, forgiveness that frees, and the quiet strength found in ordinary lives. From our hearts to yours, thank you for listening, for feeling, and for keeping the light alive.